Last month, one of my fans sent me a Penultimate cartridge. This is a modern day cartridge for the Commodore VIC-20, and it does a lot of different things. So in this episode, you're going to be seeing a lot about the VIC-20. And why not? I mean, this computer holds a special place for me because it was the first computer I ever owned when I was 6 years old. And I think that a lot of the time it's completely overshadowed by the Commodore 64, so it doesn't get nearly the attention it deserves in the world of retro computers. There's so much I want to say about this computer, but I'm going to have to restrain myself because I'm actually scripting out a full and complete episode, very detailed on this computer. But for the time being, suffice to say, it was a fairly successful gaming platform with over 300 games available for it. That's more games than the ColecoVision, the Intellivision, the Atari 5200 or 7800, the Sega Game Gear or the TSR-80 color computer, or even the TurboGrafx 16, and many others. And from a hardware perspective, as a gaming machine, what was the competition like in 1980? I mean, you had the Apple II and the Atari 400 and 800 machines, the Intellivision, the TRS-80 color computer, the VIC-20, and the Atari 2600. That was essentially the gaming market in 1980. So the Apple II was $1,298 just for the machine. But honestly, if you were going to play any games, they'd have to load from tape or more likely discs, so you'd have to spend even more money. And if you wanted a display, you'd need to buy a monitor or buy a separate RF modulator for your TV. So getting into an Apple II was a considerable expense, and it still had no sound synthesizer for games. The Atari 400 was a more reasonable proposition at $440, and it could play cartridge games like a real game machine, so this would have been serious competition. The Intellivision was priced competitively at $299, but it was just a game machine, not a computer. The TRS-80 color computer was barely competitive at $399, but it had that annoying chiclet keyboard and really a lack of any brand name commercial game titles since it was only sold in Radio Shack, and they didn't allow selling anything in the store back then with names like Atari, Activision, or Parker Brothers on the labels. The VIC-20 itself sold for $299, and the only other serious competing game platform of the day would have been the Atari 2600, which was sold at a good price, but was already out of date, and the VIC-20 beat it in both graphics and sound, plus it was a real computer. So now that I've set the stage for the VIC-20 as a gaming platform, you're about to see a lot of games, because the Penultimate cartridge is crammed full of games. I mean, you might actually be able to compare it to one of these all-in-one cartridges for like the Nintendo, but the Penultimate cartridge is actually quite a bit more than just a games cartridge, which I'm going to get into after I show you the games. For the moment, let's talk about the games. There's 40 of them in here. Let me help you visualize what that many VIC-20 cartridges would look like. And by the way, almost all of the games for the VIC-20 were in fact distributed on cartridge because it had so very little onboard memory. Okay, so I'm going to insert this beast into the computer. By the way, the VIC-20 games are notoriously difficult to insert, but on the bright side, they almost never have any issues with making good contact. I've never seen anyone having to blow into a VIC-20 cartridge. I'll also connect a joystick since the vast majority of these games require one. This is the perfect cartridge. Just hook up your VIC-20 to the living room TV and just sit back with a joystick. You don't need a disk drive or any other clutter. It's just like a game console. The first thing you'll see on Power Up is a menu. You can use your joystick to scroll through the list of games, and you can also use the cursor keys to jump entire screens and then type in the number of the game you want. Okay, so I'm just going to take these one by one in the order that they appear, starting with Aggressor. Now, I'll be honest, I've never seen this game before. It appears to be some sort of Defender clone, and I guess visually it looks okay. I looked it up and saw that this was an early game by Jeff Minter, or Jeff Minter, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, who later also founded Llamasoft. The next game is Amazing Maize, and unfortunately this game doesn't really get my blood pumping either. I'm honestly surprised it was included. Next up is Avenger. Okay, if it isn't obvious, this is definitely a Space Invaders clone, and I've actually never seen it before until now. Normally, I'm not a big fan of clone games, but in the case where the original game is not available on a platform, a good clone is okay in my opinion, and this is exactly the case here, as Space Invaders was not available on the VIC-20 or the C64. This clone is actually really well made, right down to the bases, the aliens, and the little flying saucer that sometimes comes across the top. So definitely a great game to be included here. Next up is Battlezone, which everyone is already probably familiar with. This is one of the first-person shooter type games. This version is a bit blocky on the graphics, but seems playable enough. However, I must admit I've never really been fond of this game. Here's Centipede. This is another official Atari licensed version, and it seems fairly true to the original arcade. I have no complaints about this game. Next up is Choplifter. I actually used to play the C64 version of this game as a kid. It turns out the VIC-20 version is almost identical in gameplay, with just slightly chunkier graphics. I accidentally hit one of the function keys when I started playing that changed the foreground color. So let me pick a different color. Believe it or not, that is a common feature on a lot of old VIC-20 games, that you can change the foreground color, since many of these games operate essentially as monochrome games with some different colored background areas. So I'm going to rescue my guys here and try to get away before that tank shoots me. Okay, so this is Defender. I showed a clone of this a few minutes ago called Aggressor, but this is the officially licensed version here. I'm not sure which is best. I also find it ironic that one is called Defender and the other one is called Aggressor. Anyway, not much to really talk about on this one, so on to the next. This is Demon Attack. I've never played this game until today, and it seems pretty obvious how to play it. It's sort of like Space Invaders or Galaga maybe, but for some reason it isn't really gripping me much, so I'm going to move on to the next. Next up is Dig Dug, and it should need no explanation. The gameplay here is pretty true to the arcade. As expected with this machine, the graphics are a bit chunky, but that doesn't make it any less enjoyable to play. Next up is Donkey Kong. So this is an officially licensed Nintendo game for the VIC-20. Most of the games I've shown so far have been Atari games. So you get to see the character of Mario and Princess Peach here. Although I don't think they had been officially named at this point in history. I don't have a top 10 games list for the VIC-20, but I probably should make one. But if I did, this game would definitely be on the list. I think it's one of the most well-made games for the system. I would also like to point out some of the challenge in producing a game like this on a system that has no sprites, and colors confined to little cells on the screen. Most of these games are really impressive from a programming standpoint. So this is the official port of Frogger from Parker Brothers. While this game is playable enough, it's clear the programmers on this one were a bit lazy or perhaps less creative than some of these other games I've shown. As you can see, black squares around everything, a sure sign that they're just moving characters around on the screen in a grid rather than trying to move anything pixel by pixel. And here's the official port of Galaxian from Atari. And you can clearly see the objects move much smoother pixel by pixel. So again, some great work went into this. And this is a great port of the game in my opinion. You can even hear that they made good use of all the voices on the sound chip too. Next up is Gorf, and this is an officially licensed port. And it's pretty decent except for the movement of the aliens. Next game is Jelly Monsters. I've never actually played or even heard of this game. Apparently it can be played with the keyboard or joystick. This is obviously a Pac-Man clone, and you know, it's not bad really. The movement on this game is so fluid I could almost forget the machine has no sprites, except when you see two objects of different colors get close, you can see the color cell clash. But I can't fault the programmers as that's a hardware limitation. Next on the list is Jungle Hunt. I'm not gonna lie, I've never been a fan of this game on any platform, and so it's hard to really judge it here because I hate the game one way or the other. Sorry I'm biased, but at least I admit it. And here's Jupiter Lander. Apparently I've never played this and I can't quite figure it out. I thought it would be similar to Lunar Lander, but the controls don't seem to make any sense. Besides, how would you land on Jupiter in the first place since it's a gas giant? Okay, so here we have Loadrunner. I think the first Broderbund game I've seen on here. I'm not a huge fan of this game, but I see a lot of love for this game over on the Apple II Facebook page, so I'm curious what they think of this port. I mean, it seems decently well made. Next up is Lunar Leaper by Sierra Online in 1981. Admittedly, I didn't know Sierra ever made any VIC-20 games. I guess I was wrong. Anyway, I've never played this game before either, and at first I wasn't even sure which creature I was supposed to be playing. I saw the little leaping critters, so I thought, With a name like Lunar Leaper, that I'd be playing the Leaper, but apparently I moved the flying saucer. The animation is really smooth, and I think one of the reasons they were able to do that is they're just treating the play area like a monochrome bitmap screen. However, I can't quite figure out how to play this, so I'm going to move on. Okay, so now we have Monster Maize. It's a first-person maze program. It's a little hard to navigate as I seem to run into walls faster than I expect. And the whole game clearly runs in text mode, just using various line characters. But it actually looks pretty decent despite that. Still, I couldn't quite master the gameplay. I think I need to read the manual. Next up is Moon Patrol. This game looks better than the Atari 2600 version, but that's about it. The animation's pretty smooth, which again on the VIC-20 is always a challenge due to lack of sprites. It is one of the few VIC-20 games with a soundtrack, although the music is just one voice and the sound effects are on the other voices. So while I'm not a big fan of the official Pac-Man port, I think they did a much better job with Ms. Pac-Man. The game looks kind of blocky compared to other systems due to the low resolution on this system, but otherwise this game plays really well, and I would definitely include it in my top 10 games list for the VIC-20. This is another Jeff Minter game called Attack of the Mutant Camels. So at this point we're already seeing his love for camels and llamas. I don't know if I'm playing Grid Runner or Centipede. I don't see anything that actually looks like a camel, but that's probably due to low resolution. Next up is Omega Race. This game is sort of special to me because it's the first cartridge game I ever owned for the VIC-20 back in 1982. I've only ever seen this game on the VIC-20 and the Commodore 64, but apparently it was first an arcade and was also available on the Atari 2600 and the Coleco. I always felt the game was sort of like playing Asteroids, but a little more involved. And one of the things I learned early on was that it was best to move only in one dimension and try to shoot the aliens. The moment I started moving a ship in a second dimension, I'd always crash into something. This game is essentially monochrome, other than the title screen. It's possible the original arcade may have been a vector-based CRT like Asteroids, which would explain the monochrome choice. Anyway, I spent many hours of my childhood playing this. Okay, so next on the list is the official Pac-Man port from Atari. To be honest, it isn't all that great, although I guess it's definitely better than the Atari 2600 version. So, moving on. Let's have a look at Pharaoh's Curse. This is another one I've never heard of until now. The game reminds me of Montezuma's Revenge, and it's definitely a game that would require some practice to ever get very far, but it looks like it could be fun. On to the next. So this is the official pole position from Namco. There's really not a lot for me to say here. I mean, the game looks and plays fine considering the limitations of the system, but for some reason I just don't find it to be any fun. And here's the official port of Q*bert for the VIC-20. Unfortunately, I have nothing good at all to say about this port. Not only does Q*bert not move, I mean he just sort of appears on the next cube almost like he teleports around instead of jumps. But there are black squares around the characters. This is because the game essentially runs in text mode and they've just redefined some of the characters. I think this may actually be the worst port of Q*bert on any system. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand the limitations of the machine and there's a lot of problems to overcome not having any sprites, especially with the diagonal lines crossing through color cell areas. But even if they had to make the game monochrome, I would have preferred some animation over the extra color. Anyway, rant over, on to the next. This is Radar Rat Race, which is unique to the VIC-20 and the Commodore 64. The game is obviously a ripoff of Rally X, but I always sort of liked the little rats chasing after the cheese and avoiding the cats. The game is ridiculously simple from a technical level, and this would be super easy to code. But oddly enough, this was a decently fun game from my childhood. Next up is Robotron 2084. I never actually cared much for this game. I think I preferred Berserk, which had a similar type of gameplay. This is Seamus, a game I've never heard of. I kept waiting to see Alfred Hitchcock walk across the screen or something. Anyway, this seems to be another sort of Berserk or Robotron type game, although the graphics are a little bit more interesting in this one. Next up is Star Battle, another one I have never played before. It is most definitely a Galaxian clone, although I definitely prefer the official Galaxian port over this one. I tried playing Submarine Commander, but I honestly couldn't figure out how this works, so I need to find the manual and read it, I suppose. Super Slots is pretty much what it sounds like, and there's not a lot I can say about it, other than it's a slot machine. Next up is Threshold, and it's another Sierra Online game made back in 1981. I never played this before, but I still get the sense this is another Galaxian or Space Invaders clone, and it's just not gripping me. Next up is Tutankhamun. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Never played this one. The game looks kind of interesting, but I definitely need some practice to get very far with this. So the last 4 games on this cartridge are all Scott Adams adventure games. These were quite popular back in the 80s on a variety of computer platforms. These are just text games, and so the gameplay is going to be pretty similar regardless of which computer platform you play them on. So there's not really a lot to show here. Okay, so now that I've covered the games, and by the way, there's a lot more games for the VIC-20 than what was on the cartridge, but I do think that most of the best games for the platform were on here. But what else does the cartridge do? Well, for one thing, it adds more memory. So, the original VIC-20 only had 5K of RAM, only 3.5 available to the user. Commodore officially sold 3K, 8K, and 16K RAM upgrade cartridges, and they also had the Super Expander, which was 3K with an enhanced BASIC to go along with it. I did a whole episode on that one. But anyway, the Penultimate cartridge can upgrade the VIC-20 all the way to 35K. Plus, it has a menu-driven system to allow you to pick a variety of memory banking configurations that some software would require. So I've shown you a bunch of older games, but what about newer games? Yes, people are actually still writing new games for the old VIC-20, myself included. Back in 2009, I actually wrote, as an experiment, a game called Planet X1. Ironically, I've never actually seen the game work on a real VIC-20 because I wrote it in an emulator and the game requires 32K of RAM, which I didn't have a 32K RAM expansion card before. Well, now I can. So now I'm going to play the game on a real VIC-20 and see if it works. So how do I get the game over? Well, I have one of these SD to IEC adapters, which works on any Commodore machine, including the VIC-20. Oh, and guess what? The Penultimate cartridge actually supports this device directly, as you can see right here on the menu. So let's give it a try. This is a directory of what's on my SD card. Most of these games are C64 games. Anyway, here's Planet X1. So you can see I wrote this in 2009. And that's my old Yahoo email. I don't even use that address anymore. By the way, this is actually just text characters. I wanted this game to all fit in RAM, and there just wasn't enough room for a lot of fancy bitmap screens. So even the main menu here is just colorful text characters. So I'm going to have it generate a random map. This actually takes a little while. This is likely the only real-time strategy game ever made for the VIC-20. Somebody sent me a screen capture from their cell phone, by the way, where apparently this game was shown on screen of the TV show *Halt and Catch Fire* sometime in Season 2, but I haven't watched the whole season yet, so I haven't figured out which episode it was from. Anyway, it looks like one of the enemy bases ended up right next to me, so I'm just going to blow his base to Kingdom Come before he has a chance to build anything. So now you can see the enemy number has reduced to 2. So I'll need to scout around the map and find the other 2. And wouldn't you know it, I ran my tank right off into the lava. I still have one tank left, so I'll switch to that one and go see what I can find. Now, while I'm searching for the other bases, they will start generating enemy fighters, which will come looking for my base. So time is sort of the essence here. The map is really big, and so this could take a while. And, well, crap, I just lost my second tank. The game is eventually over, even though I never really added any code to end the game. So I never actually finished coding Planet X1. It was really going to do a lot more things than it ended up doing. It was more of an experiment, really, and at the time that I made it back in 2009, there seemed to be zero interest in the game. So I just kind of finished it up to the point I was satisfied that it completed my experiment. But for those who are interested, it is available free for download on my website. I was also sent this game on cassette tape to review. It's called Pentagorat, and it's distributed on cassette tape. But notice that it says it requires a VIC-20 plus 32K of RAM. I know that's a little hard to see. Anyway, so I should be able to use it with the Penultimate cartridge. So, heck, I'll just give it the maximum 35K and see how it works. Okay, so they've given us a little fast loader system with a countdown, which is nice because most games just sit there saying loading and you don't even know if it's working or not. Oh wow, this is definitely the nicest loader screen I've ever seen on a VIC-20 game. It's actually amazing that they can do all of this while still loading the game too. Okay, well I'm not going to make you sit here for the entire thing. Let's skip ahead. Okay, so this is interesting. The first thing I notice is that they're using a 40 columns text, which has to be generated on a bitmap screen because the VIC-20 hardware only does 22 columns. And it's surprisingly readable, and keep in mind this is coming from a real VIC-20 computer, not an emulator. And even these sound effects are impressive. While the VIC-20 does have 4 voices, they can only do noise or square wave with no ADSR envelope, so they're really manipulating some registers to get these effects. Okay, so this is the game. It appears I'm some sort of 3D jelly creature or something, and I'm trapped in a room. The graphics are very impressive, even though they are monochrome. Okay, so the door is locked. I guess I have to figure out how to get out of this room. Okay, I eventually determined that jumping on this grating will get me out. Okay, so are these killer smiley faces? I don't know. Either way, the animation is impressive. Well, whenever I did, I died. Well, this is certainly a game I'll need to spend some more time playing. It's actually really impressive for the hardware it's running on. So for those that are interested, I did put a link down in the description field for where you might be able to go purchase a copy of Pentagorat. I think you can download it for free if you want to use it in an emulator. So anyway, that about wraps it up for this episode. So stick around for the next one.